Are you ready to step into menopause not as an ending, but as a powerful beginning? In this transformative episode of Reproductive Rebel, I sat down with Jane Hardwicke Collings, one of the most inspiring voices in the world of women's health, to reframe menopause as a sacred rite of passage, a time to reclaim your body, your power, and your purpose. In this episode that was run at the beginning of 2025, it was one of the top performers, so we're bringing it back to you again to inspire you. We dive deep into how society's narrative around menopause keeps us small and how to break free. The hidden gifts of this transition for creativity, self-knowledge, and spiritual growth, as well as practical, empowering tools to honor your body, shifting your hormones, and embracing this next chapter with grace and authority. Whether you are perimenopausal, menopausal, or just curious about what comes next, this episode is your guide to navigating this transformative season with wisdom, courage, and rebellious joy. Tune in because menopause isn't a crisis, it's a calling. Hi, I'm Adrienne Irizarry. I'm an East Asian medicine practitioner who is passionate about women's health and helping women to live their best lives. My goal is to put you in the driver's seat of your health, offering holistic solutions for a symptom-free life. Statements made in this program are for educational purposes only and not intended as a substitution for medical consultation or advice. We do not claim to diagnose, treat, or cure any diseases. This podcast is inclusive and welcomes all gender identities. The focus of the program is on biological function, and we will use the term women throughout, but it is referencing physiological and social challenges for biology, not identity. Come as you are, I am happy you're here and welcome all performances of identity. I hope you find something helpful in this show. Welcome back to another episode of the Reproductive Rebel podcast. I am so honored to be joined this week by Jane Hardwicke Collings. Welcome to the show, Jane. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Adrienne. Thank you for inviting me. And it's such a wonderful opportunity for me to talk to like-minded women. I love the title of your podcast, Reproductive Rebel. Like, you need to be that these days, right?
Oh, goodness, yes. I completely agree. And I feel a kindred tie here. I have been following Jane's work for a while now, and she talks honestly about the most fascinating things. She has an incredible app. I could just go on and on about how amazing she is, and I'm totally having a fangirl moment that she decided to join me on the show today. But tell the audience a little bit about who you are and how you came to do the work that you do.
Certainly. Thank you. Well, I'm a 66-year-old grandma, post-menopausal, previous home birth midwife for 30 years. I'm obviously a mother if I'm a grandmother. I have 4 adult children. And I call myself an agent of the goddess. And when I refer to the goddess in my agency, I refer to the earth. So I'm working for the earth, and my mission is to do what I can to help heal the wounded feminine and the wounded masculine of our patriarchal culture. And to make sure, really, that the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren have a home to inherit, that we do what we can. My mission is to do what I can to ensure that the future is looking good for our future ancestors.
Ooh, I love that. So can you already see exactly why I had Jane on the show? She is one of these movers and shakers that are really delivering the wisdom that we used to keep in oral history tradition and passed down generation to generation and has really become lost in modern day culture. I've loved and followed your work for some time now, and I was inspired to reach out to you and ask for this interview after seeing one of your reels where you were talking about menopause as a rite of passage. In this program, we have talked about childbirth. We have talked about coming of age for young women. I've touched upon perimenopause and menopause, but I really wanted to focus and dial in on this very beautiful piece of a woman's life. And we don't typically in Western culture, because of the way that menopause is framed in the social narrative, we don't always talk about it as a rite of passage. And that's why I'm getting goosebumps as I'm talking about this, because I got so excited when I saw Jane's reel. I'm like, yes, I need to bring this onto the show. So, as I've talked about in season 2 and 3, we've looked at different kinds of rites of passage, but I'm really feeling called to have more conversation around this area. So I would love for you to share your philosophy with our audience about why you're so passionate about this topic. You feel the symptoms before you understand them. The restless nights, the hormonal shifts, the sense that something deeper is moving beneath the surface. These aren't random, they're messages. Invitations into the next chapter of your life. This January, step into Rebel Remembered, a year-long journey where your symptoms become signals, your cycles become teachers, and every stage of life becomes a rite of passage. Each month, we explore a new archetype, a new layer of feminine wisdom, and a new way your body has been asking you to listen. Through ritual, sound, body literacy, and ancestral remembrance, you'll reconnect to the woman you're becoming, not the one you were told to be. If you are tired of pushing through, if you are craving clarity, connection, and a map for what your body is experiencing, if you are ready for a year of reclamation, then join us for Rebel Remembered. Enrollment is open now. Your body has been waiting for you to remember.
Oh, well, I'm so passionate about this topic because it's really, really important. And there's a very disturbing trend to medicate menopause. But that should be no surprise because we've been groomed to medicate menopause because the menstrual cycle is medicated, childbirth is medicated for many, many women. So then the next step is that. So menopause is a rite of passage that does what rites of passage do to us, which is completely transform us into a new version of ourselves. So you've talked about the other rites of passage. I want to introduce menopause in a slightly different frame so that everybody just completely gets it. So we know adolescence, the becoming of an adult. And that takes some time and happens around puberty. And there's some question as to whether some people even make it through the becoming an adult, right? So it's a complicated process. And then the next big rite of passage or series of are around childbirth, pregnancy and childbirth. And that's matrescence. So that's a relatively new term coined by Dana Raphael in the 1970s to represent the becoming a mother. So if we go back to adolescence, the becoming an adult, so matrescence is the becoming a mother. And with the introduction of that concept, so many mothers have been able to go, oh, okay, I didn't feel like I was a mother yet. It's still coming. And then learning that they need to define how they're going to be a mother in the same way that you define how you're going to be an adult. So then fast forward to menopause, and there's premenopause, perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, and everyone's completely confused about what each of those terms mean and where they are and what they're doing and what's coming next.
Totally.
So I've coined a phrase to encapsulate that, and it's sagescence. So the becoming a wise woman.
I love that.
So
I got goosebumps.
Oh, good. Adolescence, matrescence, sagescence. So it's the frame of our lives that's about our fertility. So rites of passage have particular characteristics that have them be classified as a rite of passage. And menopause is another one of those, just like giving birth. And interestingly, as a midwife, I didn't think there could be anything more transformational than giving birth until I went through menopause. And menopause is a reckoning as well, as the other ones are. But menopause is a process that changes everything. It's not called the change of life for nothing, because basically what happens way back at menarche, our first period, a veil of estrogen descends upon us. And estrogen is known as the hormone of accommodation and self-sacrifice. And what that looks like is, as a teenager, you want to look like everybody else. You want to have the same clothes. You want to go to the same places. You really want to and need to fit in. So you accommodate all the other things and kind of sacrifice yourself to fit in. And then when you start having babies or big careers or businesses or whatever it is that you nurture and dedicate your life to, the hormone estrogen has us do whatever we have to do to keep that going. You know, like obviously with children, you put their needs first and yours last and just keep everything going. And with careers and businesses, you know, we dedicate our lives to them, we keep showing up and we sacrifice ourselves. And I'm kind of making it sound like a bad thing, but it's a good thing. We're richly rewarded for this level of dedication. It feels good when our children are going well or our career and all of those sorts of things. But often we're the ones that either miss out or are at the bottom of the list of priority and care. Normal, usual behavior under the influence of estrogen. So then at the average age for menopause is 50, 51, and there's a little bit of a pattern, and we usually have our menstrual cycle for 40 years. So you can kind of predict when your menopause is going to come if you have a physiological natural menopause, because there's all kinds of other ways to have menopause, surgical, chemical, premature. But if you remember the age you were when your period started, plus 40 years or so is maybe going to be when your last period would be. And there are some familiar tendencies in families, so mothers or sisters or whatever. So about 5 years before that last period, which you never know, but you know, maybe it's going to be 45 if you have it at 50 or whatever, our hormone profile starts to change as we leave our fertile phase and move into the second half of our life where we completely different focus. So the first thing that happens is progesterone goes down. And progesterone is a mild sedative. And we may not have noticed we were mildly sedated, but we do notice when we are no longer mildly sedated. So the first thing that happens is women wake up from being sedated and they actually see what's going on. Now, this could be great. It might not be. It could be very challenging and often is. And then the next thing that starts to happen is that the estrogen, the veil of estrogen begins to rise. And what happens is women are less interested, like on a physiological level, to look after everybody else. And obviously they do and they can, but the first thing that kind of what it feels like is an orientation to your own needs, possibly for the first time in your adult life. So prioritizing ourselves in amongst a situation where everybody's saying, what's wrong with you? You've changed. You're doing everything differently. What's going on? And mostly women have no idea what's going on, sadly, because, you know, menopause education has really only just started in the last couple of years, to be fair.
Oh, gosh,
but,
yeah.
Yeah. So for many women going through the process, they don't know what's happening and they just assume they're going crazy. Like, not everybody, obviously. And now there are a lot more people and women who are more aware of what the process is. But mostly it starts happening when you least expect it. A bit like that first contraction when you're having a baby. It's like, was that a contraction? Was that a surge? And so your first hot flush or your first experience of sleep patterns changing or whatever it is, they're the most common things at the beginning. It can either really excite someone that they're coming into that change or really scare someone because they think there's something wrong with them, or confuse women because they think, what's going on? So my passion about menopause is really a desire to educate all of us, not just women, because partners and children and work peers and bosses all need to know about this stuff. It's not like it's going to maybe happen to someone. It's definitely going to happen to every woman, unless she switches it off or changes her hormone profile with artificial hormones to avoid the symptoms. Then it's kind of like a bit of a limbo space, a bit like the pill. You know, when you introduce artificial hormones or bioidentical, whatever, but exogenous hormones, so those made outside the body, you introduce those into the body, you change someone's hormone profile. And our hormones are molecules like messengers in the body, and they go to the places where there's receptors and they tell that part of your body what to do. And it affects us on every level. You know, there's estrogen receptors in the brain, in the skin, in the gut, like everywhere. And so when we introduce artificial hormones and change our hormone profile, we change our behavior. So I think that's something really important to know, that it's not just a medication you can take to reduce the symptoms. It completely changes everything about you. And that may be what someone's choosing, but they need to know that. They need to know the extent to the change that's happening. And as I also said, we're groomed to medicate menopause. And it's tragic to me to see these major transformational experiences in our lives that are being medicated. It's like the places where women can access their inner power, the menstrual cycle, childbirth, and menopause, are all being suggested to be medicated. And, you know, that's a dominant and predominant experience for a lot of women. And, you know, that funny little saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Like, there are side effects. And they won't affect everybody, but women need to be totally aware of them so they can watch them. And there will be some women who need medication to help them through menopause, just like there are women who need medication and medical help in childbirth or in the menstrual cycle. But as we know, as birth workers and those interested and aware of what goes on in the birth world, we know there's a lot of unnecessary intervention that happens at birth, like so much, right? And unnecessary intervention results in a cascade of intervention and, you know, increased cesareans, increased instrumental births, and increased birth trauma, right? And PTSD. So we have learned so much, Adrienne, from childbirth that we need to take to menopause. You know, we need to examine and, I believe, aim for physiological menopause, because we know that if we work with our bodies, rather than trying to manipulate it and change it, if we work with our bodies, then we get the most out of the process. And there is so much to be gained from a conscious physiological menopause. It's a time of massive transformation. It's a time where we leave the summer of our lives, you know, when we're like you, look at you, ripe and beautiful and breastfeeding and pregnant and having more babies, or focused on our careers and business and doing so well. That's the summer. That's when we're on fire, when we're like fully there. And that is not the place we stay forever. You know, it's a place of growth, but nothing in nature continues to grow that's healthy. So having the awareness of our life seasons, that spring is our maidenhood from 0 to 25, and we have our menarche rites of passage then at around 13 or whenever. At 25 to menopause, we're in the summer of our lives, and we're the way that the patriarchal culture wants us to be forever. Hence the encouragement of staying there rather than go to the next phase, which is the autumn of our lives. So menopause is the portal from the summer to the autumn or the fall. And as we know from the garden and from agriculture and from the forests, that autumn is the time of the harvest. And the harvest is actually feedback. So feedback of how well or not well you nurtured and looked after the seed that grew to this point of harvest. So a lot of the changes and inner work and healing that needs to happen around menopause, that wants to happen around menopause, is inner child work, healing, and sexual healing, and then later on, trauma around childbirth, if that's happened. So menopause is actually, to quote Dr. Christian Northrup, the mother of all wake-up calls, she calls it. And she says that everything that you've swept under the carpet comes out at menopause to be healed. So my way of saying that is it's feedback. And you know how with the menstrual cycle is feedback each cycle for how you've lived that cycle? So menopause is the feedback for how you've lived your whole life. And
Ooh, I
often,
like that.
exactly. So the changes are kind of obvious too. Like there's really no surprises about what needs to change by the time you get to about 45, 50. It's the things you've been going, oh, no, I can still do it, or I still want that, or whatever. Like the experience a woman has of the symptoms, and I go symptoms because symptoms implies a disease, and menopause is not a disease, although it is being purported as that, a hormonal deficiency disease, or recent terminology, estrogen deprivation, I've seen being used. So menopause is the becoming of a wise woman. And if we can navigate that with taking advantage of all the gifts of it, the harvest, the reflection on what we need to change in our lifestyles, we can reduce the severity of the symptoms simply by doing things like reducing caffeine, particularly coffee, alcohol, tobacco, and stress. So all of these things make all the symptoms worse. So often a woman's experience of physical, mental, and emotional, because that's it, you have a physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual aspect to menopause. It's not just about the inconvenient symptoms, it's changing you on every level. And for the better, because the world needs wise women. I mean, always, but now more than ever. So I really encourage women to find out as much as they can about what to expect and prepare. That was a long answer.
Oh, I love it. And there were so many good pieces in there that I'm like, oh, that is such a great point. So talking about menopause as a rite of passage, I read a book when I was preparing for my own birth. I've had two home births now, and this book is talking about childbirth as a rite of passage. It was by Rachel Reed. And I loved how she talked in that book about how childbirth has become so medicalized, which speaks to your point, and that the narrative that's created around it is that of your body needs to be fixed. And I'm using that in air quotes for anyone who's listening to this, that there's something perceived to be wrong with your body. And then the Western medical model needs to come in and quote unquote fix it. And their solutions often are hormonal, as you were talking about. Interventions that we see during the birthing process is an example that she was using in the book. But I was thinking about, when you were talking about the fact that there's certain criteria around a rite of passage, and that our bodies have done this for generations, and it's only been in the last 250 years with the rise of the allopathic Western healthcare model that we have started with this conversation that our bodies are a quote unquote broken thing to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
When our body is brilliant and it knows how to do the thing, if we can just get out of the way and allow for that to happen.
Exactly. So
So,
just like birth.
yes, exactly, just like birth. And when I think about menopause, I think about it as another form of birthing. A new version of you is stepping forth into the world. And to me, it just seems so powerful. And to your point around the fact that education for this very potent and powerful moment in your life is only recently like starting to rise because people are demanding it. I remember, and one of the reasons why I do the work that I do is when my mother was going through her menopausal transition, I remember because I was very early in my own training, and she said to me, she goes, if you do nothing else, Adrienne, she said, please teach people about this moment in their life, because she goes, I cannot find resources anywhere, and I feel so hopeless and so helpless because I don't even know like where my body is taking me at this point. And she felt like she was kind of at the mercy of this wild ride that she had no guidebook for.
Mm.
And that statement really broke my heart because to me, stepping into this phase of your life is so incredibly powerful. And as a East Asian medicine practitioner, we talk about it kind of like a coming into second spring. So, it is like autumn, but essentially it's this new phase of your life where you are reclaiming your essence self and you're moving forward with far fewer restraints in terms of who that is, what that wants to be in the world. So when women go through menopause, it's you know, I want to go on trips with girlfriends and I want to go back and do this degree that I didn't have a chance to finish because I got pregnant, or, they start dreaming into what they want their life to be. And a lot of the negatives that come with it that we've come to kind of socially expect as just part and parcel of the menopausal process really comes by way of denial of that voice and what that essence self wants to do. And the fact that, in the social circle that they find themselves in, it may not be in alignment with what people around them either come to expect of them or with who they were when they were younger.
Mm.
And I've seen so many of my clients so powerfully step into this rite of passage in their life. And, some of it is asking questions like, why am I the only one that can take these damn shoes up the stairs? You have two capable hands, do it yourself, right? And then everybody's like, why do you have to be such a bitch about it? And it's like, well, but it's a matter of you're capable.
Mm.
And I've always cared for you, but it doesn't mean that I'm the only one that can do this.
Mm.
And so women step into this very powerful position where they're less concerned about what people around them think, and they just speak more of their truth, which is such an
Mm.
empowered position to be in.
Totally. And part of the thing that's contributing to that is that the process of menopause takes us to our new hormonal levels. And interestingly, they're the same or very similar to what they were pre-menarche. And that our dominant sex hormone post-menopause is testosterone. So that's the characteristics of that woman that you just were saying there. So, there's something else too that happens post-menopause or through menopause, is the receiving of a mission. So this is the harvest kind of situation. It's like everything that you've done so far in your life starts to become the fruit so that you can then use that to take a new direction or go deeper in the direction you're already headed.
The book Bitter or Better, I Decide by Hannah Koch is a practical and uplifting guide to turning life challenges into stepping stones. Bitter or Better shows how to understand yourself, resolve conflict, strengthen relationships, and reconnect with the source of love so you can choose better, not bitter, every day. For more information, go to bitterorbetteridecide.com.
So we're also primed for leadership through the hormonal change. And part of the way we know that is the discoveries of the evolutionary biologists they asked the question some time ago, what could possibly be the use of human women post-menopause when they're not fertile? What do we need? Why are they still living? Which is a pretty dreadful question. But what they did, which is what evolutionary biologists do, is to look into nature to see where else, or if there were any other creatures that have menopause. There's only 5 creatures on the planet that go through menopause. Human women, beluga whales, pilot whales, orcas, and narwhals. So they're the toothed whales, and they studied them to see what was the point of them still being alive post-reproduction. And what they found, which is clearly the blueprint for mammalian menopause, is that those whales, those post-reproductive grandmother whales, were the leaders of the pods. And if they weren't there, then the pod went to shit. And if they are there, their grandchildren thrive and their daughters have more babies and live longer. And I love this bit, they keep their sons out of fights.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, so that's the blueprint for mammalian menopause, is to be a leader. Imagine. Because the other thing that happens post-menopause is we have increased visionary capacity and increased intuition and clarity of thought. We are less reactive because our amygdala calms down. And we have the long-term perspective, long-term thinking. So perfect for leadership. And that's not a new idea. You know, the grandmother council was always a thing in traditional cultures. So there's so much goodness that happens in the menopause journey. And all we're hearing about is the scary stuff about how menopause is dangerous and that you're going to get this disease and that disease and the other disease, and you've got to take HRT or MHT, menopause hormone therapy, to protect your bones and your brain and your muscles. And yes, some people need it and most will not. But at this point in time, everybody's thinking they have to. Otherwise, they're taking too many risks. I want to add something really significant and important, because there's a lot of fear around bone health and bone density and osteoporosis and all of that. So one of the leading causes of osteopenia, which is less bone cells, which is the prequel to osteoporosis, which is a low level, one of the main causes is an eating disorder. And there's ways to help women who've had eating disorders in the past. They need to improve their bone health, and they do that through exercise and nutrition. So if anybody's had an eating disorder or has or whatever, that there are things you need to do to prepare for menopause, because our bone density peaks around our late 20s and then slowly declines. And there's a 10% drop at menopause, which is fine if you're fine. Yep. And you can increase your bone density with exercise and diet wherever you are. But, to go into menopause in as healthy as possible way and as strong as you can be and fit and well is the suggestion.
I love that. I get a lot of questions about bone density, so I'm really glad that you mentioned that. There was another reel that you did recently too that I also want to kind of pull into this conversation, because you were talking about how, when you're in your childbearing years, there's a little bit of that softening around, how you step forward and show up in the world. And you were talking about there's a lot of perimenopausal women who are having children. And because they're having these children later in life, they're navigating motherhood and they're starting to navigate some of these hormonal changes at the same time. So that really resonated with me, because not only am I in my 40s now, but I also have an infant. So that really spoke to me. I'd love for you to talk about navigating that dynamic as you're seeing these hormones change and as you feel the priorities in your life and the focal points of your life changing as these dance of hormones continues its trajectory.
Very important conversation to have, because birth rates over 40 are increasing for all the reasons that we would expect, that many women are doing their careers first or getting their housing situation sorted before they have babies. So a lot more choice around, not for everybody, of course, but, there's still an increase in births over 40 years old. And that can also be as a result of an infertility journey as well. Like women working on the pill or another hormonal contraception, go off the pill, ready to have babies. And sadly, for many, it's the beginning of an infertility journey, especially if they're older. So what I want to say is that there can be other things going on postpartum for older mothers. And when I say older, I'm talking about, like 40s. And I don't mean that that's an old mother, like in the medical term, it's a geriatric mother, to be fair. But you know what I'm meaning? I'm meaning women having babies in their 40s that sometimes after the baby's born, so in the postpartum time, there can be signs that are playing out in our body and our mind and our mental capacity and all of that are not perimenopausal. So the first thing to do is to just be clear that whatever you're feeling postnatally when you're in your 40s may not be perimenopause. It could be postnatal depletion, which sadly is rife because we rush through, we don't necessarily get looked after, we don't have our village, we don't eat properly, and all the things, conditions that create postnatal depletion, and the results of that can be confusing with perimenopause. So that would be the first thing to just check out. And there's some great work being done about that. There's an Australian doctor, Oscar Celorak, who's got a book called Postnatal Depletion and a whole series of information. That would be the first thing to check. And then if it's not that, and it's the beginnings of the decline of progesterone, so you're no longer mildly sedated, and then the beginnings of the decrease of estrogen, so that veil of estrogen rising, that can feel confusing and totally disrupting in terms of what you're needing to do. So if we realize and know that motherhood is bhakti yoga, it is the yoga of dedication, it is self-sacrifice and looking after a baby. Now, hopefully you've got help, but basically, the mother is probably going to be the main person in the baby's life in the first however long, especially if you're breastfeeding. And I would very much encourage prolonged breastfeeding for mothers who have babies in their 40s. Now, there's some good reasons for this because I've just got a piece of paper here I'm going to read from because I can't possibly remember all of this, but breastfeeding hormones change the way you feel, as those who've breastfed know. So we have elevated prolactin, which promotes relaxation. We have elevated oxytocin, which enhances bonding and love. We have increased endorphins, which act as a natural pain relief and improve well-being and reduce stress. And we have higher levels compared to non-breastfeeding mothers of serotonin. And that stabilizes your mood, improves your sleep, and reduces postpartum depression risk. So at the same time, there's dopamine levels are regulated to allow prolactin to elevate. So they're lower than normal. And that basically what that does is it balances our emotional state. And we have suppressed estrogen and low progesterone, which basically means we maintain a lower energy demand and so that we can make the milk, and it supports contraception if we breastfeed exclusively. And we also have follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Both of those are suppressed by the hormones of breastfeeding. So that stops your period coming back, but not for everybody. So with all those positive effects of increasing our mood and our sleep, decreasing our stress, etc., it's a very good idea for the mother to have those feelings for as long as possible. But the main reason I want to promote this is that I did this post on Instagram talking about that, the one you referred to, and it had nearly 1 million views. So it's a very common situation. And the predominant reaction or response in the comments were women, mothers, feeling really guilty about not having the energy or even the desire to play with their children or give them as much, energy as they could or might or would or whatever. So to breastfeed as long as you can, what you do there is you really establish a foundation for that baby as a person who will grow up and become an adult with a foundation of secure attachment. Now, attachment is where it's at. Now, you can also have secure attachment if you bottle feed, but if you're going to bottle feed and give formula, then you need to do it in a way where you are present in the same way that you can be present when you're breastfeeding. So no breastfeeding or bottle feeding on your phone, no talking to other people. I mean, you might have to your other children or whatever, but focus on the baby, however you're feeding them, is going to ensure that they develop with that level of attention from their mother and they won't have that missing part. Because then later, when menopause really cuts in and the mother's got less energy and less interest even, they know that their baby has that great foundation to start with. So that's something about that. Now, I've got some other recommendations that obviously education is really significant and important for mothers in their 40s with little people so that they know what to expect. And also to carry your baby and your children as long as you can, because that will really help your bone health. Because the way our bones get dense is when they get the messages from the muscles that it's heavy, heavy work. So they have to get stronger. So breastfeed or consciously and attentively breastfeed and bottle feed. Use your babies as your exercise, because it's amazing how strong mothers are. And gather your village if you haven't already got it, because there'll be others in the same situation who will need the same level of support. You can take turns. You could go and do the grocery shopping on your own. And that would be an amazing experience for someone going through the beginnings of menopause. And you're helping each other to do the same thing. And also get ready for the inner work you need to do. And then there won't be surprises. And also maybe there's some supplements that will be helpful. But there's lots you can do. You don't just get taken by menopause. It's like childbirth, if you understand the process and prepare, that increases the likelihood of a good outcome, right? So same with menopause.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I'm really glad that you mentioned the inner work piece. And I love that quote from Chrisanne Northrup, because it's true. The veil comes back and you're like looking at all of the things that you've done, not done, enabled, you've had frustrations with, but you've kept your mouth closed to keep the peace, all of those kinds of things. And it just comes roaring out. That example of the shoes that I used, I remember that client said to me, the visit I had with her before, she goes, I don't think I'm, at menopause yet. She goes, but, I'd like to start working with you so that I can make that transition gracefully. The very next appointment, she goes, I think I had an out of body moment. And I wonder if this is what you were talking about, where like these frustrations come to the forefront. And she described the shoes situation and she goes, it was the wildest thing. She's like, I could hear the words coming out of my mouth. And in my brain, I was like, what is going on right now? You don't act like this. But she's like, I couldn't stop it. It just came out. I stomped up the stairs like a small child, which made me think about this is what our body is like before we go through puberty. And she's like, and I slammed the door like a child and I sat on my bed and I started to cry. And she's like, I felt so bad because there was part of my brain going, why are you acting like this? And he was just dumbfounded because she had this interaction with her spouse. And he didn't even know what to do. He just like kind of stood there like, yeah, I don't know what I did to trigger this, but here we are. And she's like, I'm upstairs sobbing like a small child in my room going, that was totally irrational. And man, I'm so mad right now.
Hear her. I hear her.
Yeah. So like that inner work piece is so important because places where you've denied yourself, you've put yourself on the back burner, resentment can build.
Totally.
And when we haven't done that inner work, that's where, some of that rage that people associate with this transition, yes, there's a hormonal piece to it, but some of it is situational. And when we're able to, I'm doing more and more focus in my work around the spiritual side of our health and the emotional body, because that's something that Chinese medicine's always understood, is how important the emotional body is in disharmony and dis-ease. But the longer that I'm in practice, the more I feel like it's even more important than the physical most of the time, because it fuels so many things underneath the surface. And it really becomes in capital letters and bold letters and flashing lights when you get to the menopausal transition, because these things have been along with you for 40 years or more of your life. And then all of a sudden it's like, I literally am not going to dull my shine anymore, and you all are going to have to learn to adjust.
Totally. Totally. And, we have had the menstrual cycle all that time that gives us the opportunity to do this work as well, So in week 3 of our menstrual cycle, so that's halfway between the first half of the luteal phase, so from ovulation to bleeding. So in week 3 of our menstrual cycle, we have that dip of estrogen. And it's the time in our menstrual cycle when it's the time when women no longer comply. It's the inner autumn. It's the time when we tell the truth. It's the harvest time where we get the feedback of how well or not well we looked after ourselves in the beginning of our cycle during the bleeding phase. So a woman's experience of week 3 of her menstrual cycle, where everything that's not working in your life shows up, so you can let go of it with your blood and then call in the healed version of that, so that that's what grows the next menstrual cycle. So we have the opportunity to prepare for menopause by consciously enacting and doing the spiritual practice of menstruation, the rebirth that's available to us. And everybody gets a little bit of a look at what they might be like through the beginnings of perimenopause or sage essence, by how they are or were at week 3 of their menstrual cycle.
Ooh, I love that. I hope everybody rewinds that part of this podcast and plays that again, because, especially if you don't have anyone that you can talk to, that, whether this is through adoption and you don't know how the biological process went through, or people have passed away in your family, so on and so forth, and you don't have a read on what is this transition going to look like. This is a beautiful opportunity to get a glimpse of what might need to be tended in the garden before you get to that point. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Very well then, too. Very good.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I understand I could talk to you all day, because I think this is fascinating and I would love to have you on the show again. But I understand that you're coming to North America this year. Talk a little bit about what you're offering and how people can get connected with your offerings.
Great, will do. Okay, so I'm going to be coming to Mexico in May and Canada in June and July. And during those visits, I'll be offering 3 one-day workshops, twice in Mexico, once in Tulum, once in Mexico City. And in Canada, it'll be in Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, and Vancouver. And the 3 one-day workshops, the first one is called Moonsong, and it's about the wisdom of the cycles and reclaiming feminine knowledge, wisdom, and power, and the spiritual practice of menstruation and healing our menarche. And the next one is the shamanic dimensions of pregnancy. And that's all about birth. And that can be birth of a human or birth of a career or the new version of yourself. But we learn about how impactful birth is and our birth imprint, how we were born and how to work with it. And also it's preparation for birth. So we do shamanic journeying and a letting go of fear ritual. And it's very good for mothers either planning to have a baby or have had a baby and trying to figure out what happened, but also really important for birth workers. And then the third of the 3-day workshops is called Autumn Woman, Harvest Queen, and that's about menopause. And it's about menopause in the context of the culture, in the context of the cycles, and in the context of your personal life, and also how to harness the transformational powers of menopause. And then the other thing I'm going to be doing both in Salulita on the east coast of Mexico and in Golden, BC in Canada, an 8-day program called Earth Woman Rising, which is an intense immersion into the work of Shamanic Womancraft, which is the woman's mystery school that I have, the women's mystery school, the School of Shamanic Womancraft. So there's also an opportunity to do workshop apprenticeship arrangements as well, if you attend the 8-day one and the other workshops, to learn how to teach those in your community. So this is all happening very soon, and you can find the information on my website under events or on the School of Shamanic Womancraft's website. There's a banner on the landing page that takes you to it. So it's called the Siren Call Tour 2025. And I just did the same thing in England, in the UK and Europe in 2024. It feels so weird to call that last year already, but last year. And it was an amazing experience.
Oh, I'm so excited. So I am going to have all of this information in the show notes. So if you are interested in joining Jane for one of her incredible offerings, just check out the show notes so that you can connect with her. Are there any parting thoughts that you would like to leave with our audience before we close this episode?
Well, yes, I think we need to be the women the earth needs now. We're at a point in history and the history of the planet and the climate crisis and the way humans are behaving at this point in time. We need to be the women the earth needs now. And so that is awake, aware, and ready, connected to our bodies, connected to the earth and each other, so we can do what we know and hear and feel we need to do to ensure that we leave our children and grandchildren a place that they'll be glad to inherit rather than not.
Oh, I love that. I feel that in my bones that we are here to be the women that the earth needs. Thank you so much, Jane, for joining me. I feel so honored by your presence, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with our audience. And if I get lucky, maybe I can have Jane on again. Make sure to check out the show notes, everyone. And thank you for joining us for another episode of Reproductive Rebel. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Reproductive Rebel. Reproductive Rebel is recorded by certified peri-steam hydrotherapist and acutonics practitioner, herbalist, and Chinese nutritional therapist Adrienne Irizarry of Moon Essence LLC. If you are interested in setting up an appointment for one-on-one support, ordering from our store, or checking out our course offerings, visit our website at moonessence.life. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and get insider information on upcoming events and offerings. Join the conversation. Like and follow us at MoonEssenceMe on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Your voices make this program possible. Thank you all for your continued support.